Attention please, gentlemen. Your attention please. Thank you. All right, I think we're all here. Now, here to present the recent developments of our ongoing Rail Tour project is Branco's CEO, Sir Brian Stanley. Thank you for that introduction, Mr. Davies. Gentlemen, when my father first founded Branco as a young man from a small town in Cambridgeshire, he could have never thought it would become the monumental business conglomerate that it is today. Why, with enterprises in consumer goods, real estate, pharmaceutical research, telecommunications, and so on, it has helped to make Branco one of the most powerful and lucrative corporations the world has ever seen. With our latest venture, Branco Destinations, we have been able to offer our loyal customers luxurious yet affordable holidays both within Great Britain and around the world. It has also provided me with an opportunity to invest time in another, more personal passion of mine, railways. You see, my father had a fondness and interest in railways, and that interest was passed down to myself. Britain has bore the pioneers of rail travel, names like Stephenson, Brunel, Stanier, Gresley, Collett, Bulleid, and others. So last year, I made it my duty to invite our customers to experience the railways as our forefathers experienced them through a series of rail tours pulled by these creations of railway pioneers. None of these tours could have been possible, however, without contractual agreements with various heritage organisations that care for these locomotives, most notably the National Railway Museum of York. Should anything happen to these engines, they will be painstakingly repaired at our state-of-the-art facility, which I have funded myself. Last year's rail tours have proven to be a success not only for Branco, but for the rail preservation movement, with no doubt in part to the leadership of our rail tour manager, Mr. Jeffries. So it is with great pleasure that I have decided, with approval from Branco Destinations Board of Directors, to schedule another series of rail tour trains for the next summer season. Additionally, we have made negotiations with railway preservation organisations around the world to bring their locomotives here, so that the people of Britain can see what the nations of the world have done with the innovation of railways. Transportation for these engines have also been arranged and funded at my personal expense. As a final thing, the rail tours scheduled for the first week of June will be part of a celebration to commemorate the Normandy landings. War days, if you will. And we have decided that, as a thank you to the railway who went out of their way to repair one of our rail tour engines after a crash, to hold these events on the island of Sodor. It was a busy time on the island of Sodor. The start of the War Day celebration was just one day away. Every engine on the Fat Controllers Railway had important jobs to be done as more and more passengers and goods arrived on the island. Thomas the tank engine was busy too, Besides their normal jobs, he, Percy and Toby had been called away from the branch line to help out with the extra work. Thomas was having a drink before he took his next train when he heard a familiar horn. It was Mavis, pulling a line of stone trucks. "Mavis," said Thomas, "what are you doing here?" "Hello, Thomas," Mavis said, feeling rather puffed out. "There's an important stone delivery bound for the docks. Since everyone's been so busy preparing for war days, manager said I could bring these trucks to Knapford myself." "Normally me or Percy would be able to do that for you," said Thomas. "Sorry for having to do that all by yourself." "I do have some help," replied Mavis. "The clay pits aren't busy now, so Bill and Ben have been loaned out to lend a wheel. Although..." Just then, Bill and Ben fussed into the yard with trucks of stone. The trucks biffed and bounced as they pulled into the yard. "Thank goodness we're here," sighed Bill. "Now you can stop bumping me." "Bumping you?" squeaked Ben. "You're the one who bumped me, more like." "Did not, did too." "Stop fussing about, you two," called Mavis. "Now get yourselves uncoupled and follow me back to the quarry. We've more stone to collect." And Mavis fumed away, with the two tank-engine twins squabbling behind. Thomas laughed to himself. Later that day, Thomas had just delivered the stone trucks to the docks and was heading back to Knapford when he saw a rail-tour train pulled into the station. The engine had tan-coloured paint and a large dome. At the front of his train was something most peculiar. It looked like a gigantic pipe resting on top of a long truck. "Cinders and ashes!" exclaimed Thomas. "What is that?" "Well, I'm a steam engine, just like you," the engine joked. "Railway Operating Division number 2330. But you can call me Rod if you like." "Hello, Rod. I'm Thomas. I was actually wondering what that thing was behind you." "Ah, yes, this thing," said Rod. "This is a railway gun. Railway guns were used during the war to shoot at enemy targets far away, or at enemy planes that should fly over our position." "Is that for the War Days event?" asked Thomas. "Yes, it is," said Rod. "In fact, it's actually going to start the whole celebration when it fires off with a big bang." Thomas was worried. "But won't anyone get hurt?" "Not to worry," Rod said. "It's going to fire a special shell, so it'll make a big noise, but nothing harmful will shoot out." The railway gun was soon moved into a siding out of the way. Workmen raised the barrel and loaded a special shell into it to have a practice run before tomorrow's events. After the workmen went away, Mavis, Bill and Ben came back with another load of stone for the docks. They were surprised to see the railway gun. "What is that?" piped the twins. "I'm not sure," wondered Mavis, "but it looks like something we probably shouldn't touch. Back to the quarry." As Mavis made her way back to the quarry, Ben tried to follow. "Wait a minute," said Bill. "I've just had an idea." "What is it?" asked Ben. "This big thing looks like it's meant to shoot at things." "So what?" "So," said Bill, "what if we took it to the quarry and used it to blast rock?" "Wouldn't that be stealing?" asked Ben. "We'd only use it for a little bit," said Bill. "We'd give it right back when we're done. And besides, we'd be really useful if we helped the quarrymen." "Let's go for it," said Ben. The twins coupled up to the railway gun and began to pull. The railway gun only moved slightly. "Come on, Ben," puffed Bill. "Pull harder." "I'm pulling as hard as I can," said Ben. "I can't do any more." They soon gave it up and stopped to have a rest. "It's hopeless," panted Bill. "We'll never move this by ourselves." "I thought it was a silly idea anyway," huffed Ben. "No, it wasn't." "Yes, it was." "Wasn't." "Was." "What are you two doing?" thundered a voice. It was Rod, who had just arrived. Bill and Ben tried to run away, but accidentally moved backward and biffed into the railway gun. It moved backwards and stopped a few yards away from Bill's buffers. Then there was trouble. A ticking noise came from the railway gun. Then suddenly... the railway gun fired, and the blast echoed all throughout the area. Bill and Ben's wheels wobbled from the noise. Soon, the Fat Controller and the Rail Tour manager came to see what had happened. "I saw these two trying to take the railway gun," said Rod. "They tried to run when I confronted them and set off the gun after biffing into it." The Fat Controller was cross. "Bill and Ben, explain yourselves," he ordered. "We were only going to borrow it to help blast rock at the quarry, sir," said Ben. "We thought it'd be really useful." "We didn't mean to have it go off, sir," said Bill. "Your intentions may have been good," said the Fat Controller, "but you should never have done that. Hopefully now you'll understand why you should never touch something if you don't know what it is, what it does, or how to use it. And," added Rod dryly, "be very thankful that it wasn't an actual artillery shell in there. People could have been hurt or even killed." "We're sorry," the twins whimpered. "That's settled then," said the Fat Controller. "Now off you go to the quarry, you two. I'm sure Mavis will be waiting for you." "Yes, sir." Bill and Ben winced as they limped away. The day came. People from all around came to take part in the War Day celebration. All the engines had also gathered to see the start of the festivities. The railway gun had been reloaded and was ready to fire. Sir Brian Stanley from Branco had arrived to start the celebration. "And now, with all that out of the way," he announced, "let the festivities begin with a blast from the railway gun. 3, 2, 1. And the railway gun fired with a thunderous blast. Everyone cheered as the War Day celebration began. It was an unusually chilly morning on the island of Sodor, but still bright as a pin as the engines went about their day. A new rail tour pulled into Knapford Station. The train had an engine at each end. The front engine examined his surroundings. "Well, I wasn't expecting London," he said, "but it'll have to do as long as there's no..." Just then, Henry arrived with a local goods train. The engine made a face. "Steam engines," he growled. "Just what I didn't want to see. Outdated piles of scrap." Henry was cross. "Who are you calling outdated?" "Pullman 1, behave yourself," said the engine on the other end. "We're guests here after all." Henry looked back. "Are there two of you?" "Yes, we're a diesel-electric multiple unit. I'm Pullman 2. That there up front is Pullman 1, who seems to have forgotten his manners today." Said Pullman 1. "Are you two here for a rail tour?" asked Henry. "Yes, we are," said Pullman 2. "We're showing our passengers how it was to travel on the luxurious Pullman trains of the past." Henry was impressed. "I know some of those Pullman trains were pulled by steam engines too. But honestly, who could possibly enjoy luxury with all that hissing and clanking?" said Pullman 1. "Especially with all that smoke. You can barely see your buffers with all that clouding your view." So you say, Henry sniffed, and he huffed crossly away. The rail-tour manager had arranged an exhibition for the public to show off the coaches. Pullman 1 looked on in disgust. "It's disgraceful, Pullman 2, he complained. "Those people didn't even pay to ride a train." "But it's special, Pullman 1, Pullman 2 explained. "It's not every day you get to see a blue Pullman." "I suppose you're right," Pullman 1 sighed. "It's only fair to let the commoners have their fun." "Shush, they'll hear you." Edward came up to see the visitors. "I say," said Edward, admiring the blue train, "you are a splendid sight." "Oh, joy," Pullman 1 scoffed. "Another one." "Another what?" "Steam engine, that's what," Pullman 1 fumed. "And goodness me, you're far older than the one we met earlier. You're ancient." "Shut up, Pullman 1, Pullman 2 scolded. He looked at Edward. "You'll have to forgive him. I'm Pullman 2. "I'm Edward," said the blue engine. He looked at Pullman 1. "I hate to disappoint you," he added, "but a large majority of the engines on this railway are steam engines. It's been this way for many years." Pullman 1 gawked. "Your controller must be mad." "That's enough out of you, Pullman 1, said the rail-tour manager. "This isn't the mainland. Sir Topham Hatt can operate his railway however he wishes." "Agreed, sir," said Edward. Pullman 1 subsided, muttering under his breath. The summer sun began to set over the island. The 2 Pullman engines were ready for a good night's rest. "You'll both sleep in that shed over there," said their drivers, pointing to the shed at the end of the siding. Pullman 1 sniffed. "You mean for me to go in there when one of those dirty steam engines probably stayed?" he fussed. "Shan't." "All right," said his driver. "You can stay out here then." So while Pullman 1 stayed outside, Pullman 2 made his way into the shed. "This is rather nice," said Pullman 2. "Are you sure you don't want to come in here, Pullman 1? "No," Pullman 1 huffed. "It's beneath me to stay in a steam engine shed." "Suit yourself," said Pullman 2, and went happily to sleep. Next morning was unusually cold again, but still bright as a pin. Pullman 2 woke up to see Pullman 1 sitting cold and cross. "Did you sleep well last night?" he asked innocently. "No, I didn't," Pullman 1 shivered. "It's too late in the year to be this cold." "Oh well," said Pullman 2. "I'm sure you'll feel better once your engine gets going." Soon their drivers arrived to get them ready for the journey home. Pullman 2's engine roared as he made his way to the platform. But when Pullman 1's driver tried to start his engine, it wouldn't turn on. It spluttered for a moment, then stopped each time. The driver tried and tried, but the engine wouldn't start. Thick clouds of exhaust filled the air. Wind blew and carried the smog towards the station. The passengers gagged and choked on the fumes. Pullman 1 was embarrassed. He hoped that none of the steam engines would be around to see him. But they were. Edward and Henry were off to start work when they saw him. "Look, Edward," said Henry. "Whoever could that be?" "Didn't you know, Henry?" said Edward. "That's Pullman 1. Doesn't he pull the luxurious Pullman train with Pullman 2? "He most certainly does. But honestly, who could possibly enjoy luxury with all that spluttering and coughing?" said Henry. "Especially with all that smoke. You can barely see your buffers with all that clouding your view." Edward, Henry, and Pullman 2 all had a good laugh, while Pullman 1 tried to hide behind the smog. Eventually, the driver gave it up, and Henry helped Pullman 1 to the back of the train. The rail-tour manager spoke severely to him. "You've had a cold start this morning, and the passengers do not like the smell of diesel fumes," he said. "Now, Pullman 2 will have to pull you along with the rest of the train. Perhaps that will teach you not to be so uppity. Pullman 1 said nothing and looked at his buffers. The rail to a train was ready to leave for the mainland. Edward and Henry came to say goodbye. "I'm sorry that Pullman 1 was such a bother," said Pullman 2. "That's all right," said Edward. "Perhaps you'll have some peace and quiet on the way home." "Indeed," added Henry. Then the guard's whistle blew, and Pullman 2 glided the luxurious train out of the station. Pullman 1, on the other hand, shamefully muttered and looked away as he was towed along. The first of the international rail tours had just arrived at Knapford. The large green engine pulling the train had come all the way from Australia. Later, Percy arrived with some coal trucks when he noticed the newcomer. "Hello," he whistled cheerfully. "I'm Percy." "G'day," said the engine warmly. "I'm New South Wales Government Railways engine number 3806, but me mates call me Bruce." "You're from one of the international rail tours, aren't you?" asked Percy. "That's right," said Bruce. "I'll tell you what, it's nice to finally stretch me wheels with a good run after being stowed away on that ship." As Bruce told Percy all about his trip, he began to reverse. He was so busy talking that he didn't see the buffers at the end of the siding. "Look out for those buffers!" called Percy. But it was too late. Bruce bumped into the buffers with a loud thump. He didn't come off the rails or damage his buffers, but he was surprised. He shouted. "That scared the out of me." Percy was shocked. "What did you just say?" he asked. He had never heard those words before. "Ah, sorry, mate," said Bruce. "I probably shouldn't talk like that." "Talk like what?" Bruce stopped and thought for a moment. He decided to have a little fun with the small engine. "What I meant was, I shouldn't talk like that without explaining what sentence enhancers are first." "Sentence enhancers?" asked Percy. "You see," explained Bruce, "down under we love a good yarn, so we like to emphasise our experiences with certain words just for fun. In fact, we do it so much that it's leaked into daily speech for us Aussies." Percy was intrigued. "Can you teach me some of these sentence enhancers?" "Yeah, I'll learn you some," said Bruce. "Repeat after me. G'day. How the you going?" "Good day. How the you going?" "Nah, mate," said Bruce. "You ponder so uptight. You gotta be relaxed when you say it, you know. Be casual." Percy tried again. "G'day. How the you going?" "There it is," said Bruce. "Now you're sounding like an Aussie. Try this now." So Percy learnt all sorts of words from Bruce, not knowing that Bruce was tricking him to say bad words. The next day, Percy was delivering the morning mail when James came up, being his usual boastful self. "Those rail tour people couldn't get enough of me yesterday," he boasted to Percy. "They took photos of me from all angles." "I'm sure they did," groaned Percy, rolling his eyes. "I'm sure they've never seen an engine with such shiny red paint," James went on. "Stop going on about your paintwork," huffed Percy, using some sentence enhancers. "You sound like a Percy puffed away, leaving James in a bewildered state. Later, Henry was filling up his tender with coal. Percy came up in a hurry. "Come on, Henry," Percy puffed. "I'm going to be late for my next job." "Be patient," sniffed Henry. "I was here first." "Well, move it, Percy shrieked. "I don't know how day, you know." Henry, rather disturbed by Percy's language, reluctantly moved from under the coal hopper. Percy then happily filled his bunker. While Percy was having a rest in the sheds, Gordon arrived at Knapford with the express. The big engine looked over to Percy. "Take my coaches, please, little Percy," Gordon huffed grandly. "Do it yourself," Percy scoffed. "I'm tired." "Tender engines don't shunt. Shunting is for silly little tank engines like you." "F*** off with that," Percy huffed crossly. "You've got f***ing wheels, don't you? So off you." Gordon limped away, surprised at Percy. Soon, the three big engines had an indignation meeting. "Disgraceful!" fumed Gordon. "Disgusting!" put in James. "Despicable!" finished Henry. "Wherever did Percy learn such obscene language? It's most unbecoming of an engine like him." "We must tell the Fat Controller at once," said Gordon. Later, Percy was delivering the evening mail. He saw Bruce in the siding. "G'day, Percy," said Bruce. "How the f*** you going?" "Pretty f***ing good, mate," said Percy. "I like using sentence enhancers." "Percy, the small engine!" The Fat Controller appeared with the rail to a manager. He was red in the face and very cross. Percy was surprised. "Henry, Gordon and James have told me that you've been using inappropriate language all day," the Fat Controller scolded. "Now, I know where you've heard it from." "But, sir," pleaded Percy, "they're sentence enhancers. Bruce told me they use them all the time in Australia." Actually we don't," Bruce murmured. "I only told you that for a laugh. They're not sentence enhancers. They're bad words. And engines on my railway do not use foul language," the Fat Controller added. "I'm ashamed of you, Bruce," said the rail to a manager. "I expected better from you." "Yes, sirs," said the two engines. "Sorry, sirs." "That's settled then," said the Fat Controller, "and I expect this not to happen again." As the two men left the platform, the two green engines looked at each other. "Oh, I'm sorry for playing the trick on you, mate," said Bruce. "I didn't think it would get you into trouble. Truth is, I really do have a potty mouth. I'll try my best not to curse anymore." "Me too," said Percy. "I'll never use bad words ever again." "Good on you, mate," said Bruce. Rosie is a cheery pink tank engine who pulls passengers and goods up and down the line. When she first came to Circle, she was very fond of Thomas. She tried to do everything that he did. She even began to whistle like him. At first, Thomas was annoyed. But after Rosie saved him from a landslide, they'd become good friends. Whenever they passed each other, they would say hello to each other with a special whistle. Thomas would always whistle first, and Rosie would always whistle back. As time went on, Rosie, like most engines, began to grow older. And soon, she found the things she liked to do with Thomas didn't interest her as much. One day, Rosie was waiting at Knapford when a new rail-tour train came into the station.
Hello, she peeped. Are you here for a rail tour?
Yes, I am, said the engine. They caught me and my brother's greyhounds long ago. I suppose you could do the same.
Very well, Greyhound. I'm Rosie.
Just then, Thomas puffed into the station.
Hello, Rosie,
he said, and blew his special whistle. Rosie didn't respond.
Is everything okay, Rosie? Asked Thomas. Yes, it is, Rosie said. It's just, well, could you mind not doing that anymore? I don't really enjoy it like I used to.
Thomas didn't know what to say. They had always done their special whistle together.
Okay,
he said, and he puffed away. My, said Greyhound. What was all that about?
Me and Thomas would always whistle to each other when we would meet,
Rosie explained.
I used to like to do it, but now not so much. To me, it's kind of a thing that young engines do, and I don't feel like a young engine. Well, not anymore.
I see, Greyhound pondered. Well, Rosie, I think I can help. Next time you see Thomas, you should be more firm with him. Let him know that you're not a little engine anymore.
I will, said Rosie cheerfully. Thank you, Greyhound.
The next morning, Rosie was collecting some trucks from the docks when Thomas arrived. He wanted to try his special whistle with her again.
Hello, Rosie,
said Thomas, and blew his special whistle. Rosie frowned.
Thomas, she said sternly, I told you yesterday that I don't want to do that anymore. Please stop. But you've always enjoyed doing our special whistle together, persisted Thomas. Not anymore, Rosie huffed, and left the docks with her line of trucks.
Thomas was concerned. He didn't know what to think now. Salty, who had heard everything, came up. Methinks our Rosie's changing course, he remarked.
What do you mean?
Asked Thomas. I'm saying that she's getting older, no longer fond of the days of yore, like an aging rock being eroded and smoothed by the roaring sea. Thomas frowned.
Well, if she's too old for our special whistle, he decided, then maybe she's too old for me.
Don't dwell upon it like that, me hearty, said Salty, but Thomas had already made up his mind as he puffed away. Later that day, Rosie had delivered her trucks. Thomas was approaching the platform.
Hello, Thomas,
Rosie peeped. But Thomas was very rude to Rosie. He wished her loudly as he passed. Greyhound, who had saw the whole thing, was very surprised. Bless me, he said. Whatever was that for?
I don't know,
wondered Rosie. You were firm with him, weren't you?
I was, said Rosie. I did what you suggested. Maybe I was too firm?
No, I'm sure you were fine, Greyhound assured. It looks like the problem is with Thomas. I'll put it to rights. And Greyhound puffed away after Thomas. By now, Thomas was far away down the line, almost to the next station. But Greyhound was a very fast engine. He tore along the rails as fast as his wheels could carry him. At last he reached Thomas, who was still at the station platform. Thomas, said Greyhound sternly.
Hello, said Thomas. You're the rail tour engine. Greyhound, was it?
Yes. Now, what was the meaning behind wishing Rosie like that?
I don't see how it's your concern, huffed Thomas, but if you must know, Rosie thinks she's too old to be associated with me.
Wrong, Greyhound thundered. Tonight, you will meet with me and Rosie. We are going to resolve this together. And Greyhound huffed away. That night, Thomas, Rosie, and Greyhound all gathered together to discuss everything that happened. All right, said Greyhound. Let's start from the beginning. Thomas, you two used to whistle to each other as a special greeting, right? Right. And now, Rosie doesn't like to do it anymore because she feels that whistling like that is for young engines, right? Right. So, finished Greyhound, why do you think that because of this she doesn't want to be associated with you anymore?
It's one of those things we used to bond over, Thomas explained. It's part of our special connection. But Thomas, said Rosie, don't you remember years ago when I tried to imitate you all the time?
Of course, said Thomas.
And didn't you find that annoying? You said that only young engines did that.
I did, didn't I?
And I considered it a special connection too,
added Rosie.
Even then, after you told me not to do it anymore, we still remained friends. Nothing's changed.
See, said Greyhound, it's no different than before. Thomas now felt silly.
I'm sorry for not understanding and for being so rude, he murmured. I guess I didn't think about it like that. I suppose you really aren't a little engine anymore. It's all right, smiled Rosie.
She was glad that they were friends again.
Although, added Thomas, it's kind of hard to imagine you as more mature with that pink paint of yours.
Rosie thought for a moment.
Perhaps it's time for a change, she said.
The next day, Greyhound's rail tour train was due to leave for the mainland. He and Thomas were waiting for Rosie. You don't think she's being held up, do you? Wondered Greyhound. I don't think she'd be the type to not see a visitor off.
I think I see her now,
said Thomas. Sure enough, Rosie made her way to the station, looking quite different.
Rosie, exclaimed Thomas, you've gone all red.
It suits you, added Greyhound. Rosie smiled.
The workmen finished painting me just in time so I could say goodbye.
Thank you for everything, said Thomas. My pleasure, said Greyhound. Glad I could help.
Say, Rosie, asked Thomas, could we do our special whistle once more, for old time's sake?
Oh, all right, said Rosie. Just this once. And as Greyhound's train left the station, Thomas and Rosie blew their special whistles. One late afternoon, Henry the Green Engine wanted to rest. But he saw that the tracks leading to the sheds were blocked by a large black engine who was beginning to tell stories to the others.
What's all this? Henry grumbled. I'm tired and want to go to my shed. Get out of my way. Shush, Henry, whispered James.
Don't be so rude, said Gordon. This engine's come here for an international rail tour. She was telling us about her life in America, added Edward. He turned to the visitor. Sorry about that. Please continue.
No worries, the visitor assured. Now, as I was saying, at the start there was 14 of us, me and my sisters, that is. The railroad gave me the number 611. We pulled express passenger trains from Norfolk to Cincinnati and back again. We were mighty proud of our work.
Any proper express engine would be, said Gordon grandly.
Did you do anything else? Asked Edward. Well, later on, the railroad decided that they wanted diesels to pull passengers, 611 said. So they had me and some of my sisters pull freight trains. Of course, some of them believed it would be unbecoming for a proper lady to be seen pulling freight.
Gordon and James would know a few things about that, joked Edward. The two engines groaned.
Luckily, 611 added, I'm the kind of girl who ain't afraid of getting her wheels dirty. Why, not long after, I took to pulling freight like a June bug on a summer breeze.
Henry was doubtful. I find it hard to believe that an engine can get used to trucks that quickly, he said. 611 stared. And I suppose you're the aficionado when it comes to pulling freight around here? She asked. You could say that. I do it every day after all. Well, I do declare, 611 huffed. Very well then, Henry, was it? How's about we make ourselves a little old wager? I reckon that I could pull your next train better than y'all ever could. All right, said Henry smugly. But I'd be careful. I have a feeling our trucks may be a bit different than what you're used to over there. They could give you trouble. But 611 was confident. Don't worry none, sugar lamb, she assured. I've never met a truck yet that gave me an issue. The next day, Henry and 611 asked their drivers about their plan, and when they said yes, 611 made her way to the station. She could see Henry's long line of trucks waiting for her. Hey y'all, 611 called. I'm filling in for Henry today and gonna take y'all up the line. The trucks were annoyed. They were used to Henry. Who does she think she is fussing about? They complained. We want Henry, not this strange engine. Come along now, 611 said as she coupled up to the trucks. We ain't got no time for lollygagging. The trucks had other plans. Hold back, they whispered to each other. But when the guard blew the whistle, 611 started with such a jolt that the trucks were taken unawares and bumped into each other. Oh, they shouted. That was rude, we'll pay her out. That was rude, we'll pay her out.
We're cargo moving people. We do it every day. We move the freight this country needs.
Across the USA.
Like coal and steel and automobiles. You bet we know the way. We're cargo moving people. From NW Railway.
Norfolk and Western. There's no stopping us. Service you can count on. From people you can trust. When it's cargo moving time, it's time to put it on the line. From Norfolk and Western. There's no stopping us. Norfolk and Western. There's no stopping us. And Western.
We're cargo moving people.
Norfolk and Western. Norfolk and Western. Norfolk and Western. Norfolk and Western.
611 made good time as she pounded along the rails. But there was trouble ahead. Up ahead was a set of points. The trucks saw their chance. Jump the tracks, they shouted. Jump the tracks, pull her off the line. 611 rolled over the points, but one of the truck's wheels bounced over the points and off the rails. This started a chain reaction and sent some of the trucks careening off the line and uncoupled from the rest of the train. 611's brakes squealed as she stopped. What in Sam Hill was that? She wondered. Her driver looked back. We lost our train, he said. Them cars jumped the switch. The guard went and telephoned for help, and soon Henry brought the breakdown train to clear away the mess. The Fat Controller and the Rail Tour manager spoke to 611. The accident wasn't your fault, said the Fat Controller, but these trucks were meant for Henry. Why were you pulling them? Please, sir, said Henry, it's all my fault. No, it ain't, 611 interrupted. You see, sir, I did my share pulling freight trains back home. I thought I could handle these trucks just fine,
but I guess I couldn't. You did warn me after all, Henry."
"I see," the Fat Controller said. "Well, I hope you understand now that some jobs should only be done by engines who know how to do them."
"I'm sorry, sir,"
611 muttered. "That's settled then," said the rail tour manager. "But I suppose you could help Henry by clearing away this mess." The two engines then set to work. After everything was cleared, they started for home.
"I'm sorry for not being careful like you said,"
611 confessed.
"I do get rather headstrong on occasion."
"And I'm sorry I was so grumpy yesterday," said Henry. "Speaking of which, would you mind telling me about your railway?" And 611 told Henry all about it all the way back to the yard. Thomas the Tank Engine was hurrying along the tracks to Knapford Station.
Come along, he sang to Annie and Clarabelle. "A new rail tour is coming today." We're coming along, the coaches sang back.
When Thomas reached Knapford Station, he could see that the visiting train had just arrived. The engine's driver was checking him over.
"Hello," said Thomas. "Are you here for a rail tour?"
"Yes, I am," said the engine.
"I'm Blue Peter."
"And I'm Thomas." He then noticed the driver.
"Have you been hurt?"
he asked. "Oh, not at all," said Blue Peter. "Just doing some safety checks, that's all." "All right, Blue Peter," said the driver. "Everything looks good." An old woman came up to the driver.
"Excuse me, young man," she said, "but would you mind helping an old woman with her luggage?"
"Certainly, mum," said the driver. She led him to a large trunk. The station master looked worried. "Will you need some help with that?" he asked. "No," said the driver. "It looks easy enough." But it wasn't. The driver had barely lifted the heavy trunk off the ground when suddenly...
"Oh, my back!"
shouted the driver.
"I've hurt my back! Someone call an ambulance!"
ordered the station master. Soon an ambulance arrived to take the injured driver away. Blue Peter was worried. "I hope he's not too badly hurt," he said. "The medic said it was just a sprain," said the fireman. "So it's nothing serious, but it looks like he'll be in hospital for a few days, so he won't join us for the journey home."
"So someone else will have to be my driver?"
"That's right," said the fireman. "A relief man will come along for tomorrow's train." Now Blue Peter was scared. He worried and fussed to himself as he limped to the shed. Thomas came to see him.
"Cheer up, Blue Peter," he whistled. "It might never happen." "I don't consider this a time for joking about," Blue Peter said sternly.
Thomas made a face.
"What's the matter?" he asked. "A relief man will be coming to be my driver tomorrow." "But isn't that a good thing?" "You don't understand," Blue Peter explained. "He may not be familiar with my controls. Not long ago, a crew was assigned to drive me for a special train. They didn't know much about my controls. They primed my boiler, and I ended up doing a violent wheel slip that destroyed my side rods." "Priming?" asked Thomas. "Isn't that when there's too much water in your boiler and leaks into your dome?"
"That's right," said Blue Peter. Now Thomas wanted to help. He didn't want to see Blue Peter get hurt again.
"You should tell your relief man that you're cautious," he said. "That way, he'll know to be careful with your controls."
"Very well," Blue Peter agreed. but secretly he was skeptical. The next day, Blue Peter was getting ready to take the rail to a train back to the mainland. He had just backed down onto his coaches. The firemen had left the cab to fetch the relief men. "Now for my plan," said Blue Peter to himself. Slowly, he rattled his linkages to disengage his brakes. He slowly looked around, and luckily, no one saw or suspected anything. Next, he rattled his linkages again, this time opening his regulator. He began to move out of the station, slowly at first, then faster and faster. "Hey, where are you going?" It was the fireman who had just come back with the relief men, but Blue Peter was too far away to hear him. Blue Peter made his way down the countryside. He enjoyed being able to move on his own. But then he passed a signal telling him to slow down. Blue Peter tried to engage his brakes, but he couldn't. "Help! Help!" he whistled. "I can't stop! I can't stop!" He rolled into the tunnel and out the other side. Thomas was standing at the platform with Annie and Clarabelle. "Blue Peter, look out!" shouted Thomas. "I can't stop!" called Blue Peter back. Quickly thinking, Thomas slowly reversed from the platform. Blue Peter hit his buffers with a bump. Thomas's driver then applied his brakes, then clambered into Blue Peter's cab and shut off steam and applied the brakes. Blue Peter was relieved. "Thank you, Thomas," the big engine panted. "What are you doing all the way out here?" asked Thomas. "Isn't your train due out?" "It's a long story. I'll tell you on the way back to the station." So Blue Peter and Thomas made their way back to Knapford. The rail tour manager was waiting. He was very cross. "Blue Peter," he scolded, "what were you playing at, rolling away with no driver?" "I'm sorry, sir," Blue Peter winced. "I panicked. I didn't want the relief man to drive me, in case he wasn't trained into how to, and something would happen like in Durham again." "What are you talking about?" the relief man exclaimed. "Of course I've been trained." "That's right," the rail tour manager said. "We've made sure that all of our crews have been trained and certified to operate such equipment." "Why didn't you just tell them you were nervous?" asked Thomas. "That was my idea after all." "I know," said Blue Peter, "and I should have. I was just scared." "Now, Blue Peter," said the rail tour manager, "you should always tell someone if you have a concern about anything, especially if you're scared." "I'll remember that, sir," Blue Peter said, feeling reassured. "Now, that's quite enough of that," said the rail tour manager. "It's time this rail tour train was off." Soon Blue Peter was coupled to his coaches, and the reliefman was checking him over. "Right, you're all set," he said. "Thank you," Blue Peter said. "I'm sorry I was skeptical of you. You're doing well so far." "Hopefully you'll be sensible now," said Thomas. Then the guard's whistle blew, and Blue Peter started off for home. It had been very hot on the island of Sodor for several days. While steam engines could work fine in hotter weather, their crews had to deal with both the heat of the day and the heat of the engine's firebox. It was very important that the drivers and firemen kept themselves cool and hydrated during the warmer days to save themselves from heat-related illnesses. But illness wasn't the only thing to worry about. During the hotter days, risk of line-side fires also increase, as sparks from an engine's funnel can settle on plants growing alongside the track and set them ablaze. Because of this, regretfully, the Fat Controller had to suspend some steam traffic on the railway. So diesels were called in to fill in for them. The engines grumbled at their predicament, especially Gordon. "It's disgraceful," he huffed. "I'm not meant to sit and do nothing while diesels pull my express." "You're not the only one that feels this way," said Edward. "I'd rather be really useful myself. Be thankful that the Fat Controller is letting you go out today and that the rail tours haven't been cancelled." "I know I should," Gordon groaned, "but it's most irregular." "It'd give us a break from this heat," said Gordon's driver. "It's blistering. Thank goodness the missus gave me this little battery-powered fan to use." "I'd fancy a holiday in Australia myself," the fireman replied. "Their weather's backwards." The driver laughed. "A real Christmas in July, then," he chuckled. As Gordon huffed away, Percy began to wonder.
Did you hear what Gordon's driver said? He asked the others. A Christmas in July. That sounds like fun.
"I think he was only making a joke," said Edward. "I don't think anyone really does that."
"But what if we did have our own Christmas in July?" Percy suggested. "That way we won't feel bored."
"I'd be interested," said Toby. "If anything, it could make us forget about this heat." "Why not then?" agreed Edward, and the three engines began making their plans. The next morning, Percy had just delivered the morning mail when a new international rail tour train glided into the station.
"Hello,"
Percy greeted the visitor.
"I'm Percy."
"Hey there," the visitor cheerfully replied. "Pierre Marquette 1225 at your service."
1225? Percy pondered. That's just like the date of Christmas.
"Yeah, I get that a lot."
"Would you like to join our Christmas in July party?" Percy asked, and he explained his plan.
"Sure I would," 1225 said. "It'll be a good distraction from this heat." Soon all the engines were told about the Christmas in July party. Everyone wanted to take part in the fun, except for Gordon. "What nonsense," he grumbled. "Christmas needs to have snow and cold and ice. It just isn't right when there isn't." "Come on now," said 1225, pulling alongside. "Where's your Christmas spirit?" "I can't be in the Christmas spirit when it's so hot out. It's even worse today." Gordon was right. It was hotter than ever today. The Fat Controller had suspended most of his steam engines from service, but they didn't mind. They were excited about the thought of having a Christmas party in the summer. The workmen had even gotten out wreaths from storage to put around the shed. Meanwhile, Gordon thundered along the rails with the express. "Hurry, hurry, hurry," he panted to himself. But neither Gordon or his driver saw a spark from his funnel land on some nearby weeds and start a small fire. It soon became a roaring blaze. 1225 was making his way to the party when he saw the terrible sight. "What in blazes?" 1225 exclaimed. "The hillside's ablaze!" "We have to call for help," said his driver. Soon, the fire brigade was on scene containing the flames. Then there was trouble. "We're running low on water," shouted the fire chief. "We have enough to control it for now, but not enough to extinguish it. We'll just have to let it burn and hope it doesn't spread."
there's water in my tender, 1225 announced. Can't you try that?
It's worth a shot. Right then, hook him up, boys.
1225's idea had worked. The fire brigade was able to use his water to fight the flames, and soon the fire was out.
Well done,
said the fire chief. The Christmas in July party was well underway when Gordon came back to the sheds.
So, you decided to join us after all?
Asked Edward.
It wasn't my choice, Gordon insisted. The Fat Controller wanted to speak to all of us.
But where's 1225? Asked Percy. I thought he'd be here.
Here I am, just a bit late,
said 1225 as he rolled up to the turntable with the Fat Controller, the Rail Tour manager, and the fire chief.
Your attention, everyone,
called the Fat Controller.
Earlier today, a trackside fire started on the main line. The fire was extinguished thanks to 1225 and his quick thinking.
The engines cheered. Well done, they said.
However, the Fat Controller continued, after some investigation, we discovered that the spark that started the fire had come from you, Gordon.
Gordon was aghast.
I didn't mean to do it, sir, he pleaded.
I know, the fire wasn't your fault, the Fat Controller assured. But now, I hope you all understand why I've had to limit the number of steam engines running on the railway. Yes, sir, said the engines. But that's not all, the Fat Controller concluded. According to today's weather report, we can expect a cool down in the coming day, so I've decided to cancel the suspension and you can all start back to work tomorrow. Hooray! The engines cheered. I guess, 1225 remarked, you can call this a Christmas in July miracle. And everyone had a good laugh. A new rail tour train had just arrived on Sodor. Its engine pounded along the rails as he made his way to Knapford. Gordon was already there with the express.
Hello,
he said to the visitor.
I'm Gordon. You must be here for a rail tour.
You're right, the visitor said. I am the Duke of Gloucester.
Oh, yes, said Gordon. I've heard of you. Some engines at Barrow told me about you.
Ah, yes, the Duke's reputation often precedes him.
In that case, Gordon chuckled, they said you were a very lazy engine.
Duke of Gloucester frowned. Lazy? He protested. I? What nonsense! The Duke is a very powerful engine indeed. Gordon laughed. Very well, then I have no other choice but to prove it, he continued. When your next train is due out, I will pull it, with you still attached. Soon the arrangements were made, and Duke of Gloucester was coupled to Gordon.
This is never going to work, huffed Gordon. You'll only make me late.
On the contrary, Duke of Gloucester announced, I intend on being early. And when the guard's whistle blew, he pulled and strained as Gordon and the coaches drew out of the station. He was making good time too, as he huffed along the line. They soon came to the next station. station master stared at Gordon. "You're early," he said to the blue engine. Gordon was amazed. Duke of Gloucester laughed. "Now that you know of my strength," he said, "don't ever doubt the Duke's abilities again." The Duke left the station as the passengers cheered. Gordon felt silly and wanted to get back at him. Later, Gordon was grumbling in a siding when Henry arrived. "What's the matter, Gordon?" he asked. "It's that visitor, Duke of Gloucester," Gordon huffed. "He made me feel foolish." "I heard," Henry laughed. "But you know, he wasn't actually lazy. It's just how he was built." "What do you mean?" "When he was preserved," Henry explained, "they made some improvements to his design. Now he's as strong as ever." "You are correct," said Duke of Gloucester, who had just pulled up. Gordon sniffed and looked away. "Perhaps the Duke shall prove it again." He looked at Henry. "What do you say, big fellow?" So Duke of Gloucester was coupled up to Henry. "Before I begin, Henry," he said, "please put on your brakes." Henry frowned. "That won't work," he said. "You'll only hurt yourself. Trust me, the Duke will triumph." So Henry applied his brakes, and the Duke puffed and pulled the green engine all the way to the end of the siding. Then he pushed Henry all the way back to the buffers. "There," Duke of Gloucester huffed. "The Duke has pulled and pushed an engine with its brakes on. Only a very strong engine could do that." "I just so happen to be a very strong engine myself," Henry announced. And he pushed Duke of Gloucester all the way to the end of the siding. Gordon laughed. The Duke was furious. "You dare beat the Duke at his own game?" "I wasn't trying to beat you," said Henry. "No one outwits the Duke," he fumed, as he angrily puffed out of the yard. Gordon and Henry were surprised. Duke of Gloucester had stopped at a water tower. He muttered angrily to himself. "Cheer up," said his driver. "Those two engines know you're strong now. You've proven it twice, and that's enough." "But Henry pushed me," the Duke fussed, "as if I weighed nothing." "So they have their own strong engine on the island, no different than anywhere else you've been." "But I've never been shown up before," Duke of Gloucester said. "I don't intend to now." Then Murdoch passed by with a heavy goods train. Duke of Gloucester looked at the big engine and got an idea. The next day, Gordon and Henry had arrived at Knapford to begin the day's work, when they saw Murdoch and Duke of Gloucester coupled together back to back. "Whatever is this?" asked Gordon. "Hark, I say," Duke of Gloucester announced. "Now you will see the might of the Duke as he pulls against this mighty engine." "This isn't going to end well for you," said Murdoch. "You're going to get hurt." "Silence!" Duke of Gloucester called out. "Now we shall begin." The two engines strained against each other. Duke of Gloucester puffed and pulled as hard as ever he could. But Murdoch is also a strong engine, so strong that he barely moved against the Duke's pulling. He pulled, and he pulled, and he pulled, until... One moment he was on the rails. The next, the coupling broke and he shot forwards into the buffers. No one was hurt, but the Duke's front wheels had come off the rails and were resting on the ballast. Duke of Gloucester felt ashamed. Murdoch helped Duke of Gloucester back on the rails. The Fat Controller and the Rail-Tour manager spoke to him severely. "There are many ways for an engine to exhibit their strengths," the Fat Controller said, "but certainly not like this. This could have been much worse for you," the Rail-Tour manager added. "Be thankful that your damage was minimal." "I'm sorry, sirs," Duke of Gloucester muttered. "Hopefully now you'll understand that you don't need to be boastful to get your point across," said Henry. "We never meant to make you feel silly," added Gordon. "And next time, you won't put yourself in harm's way," finished Murdoch. Duke of Gloucester could only agree. Murdoch is the strongest engine on the island of Sodor. His 10 drive wheels help him pull heavy goods trains along the main line. Despite his large stature, he is a very shy and gentle engine. One day, James and Murdoch were waiting to start work when Percy ran into the yard looking very frightened. "Help!" he wailed. "Monster!" "Slow down, Percy!" called Murdoch. Percy skidded to a stop, his axles quivering with fear. "What was all that about?" asked Murdoch. "There's a monster heading this way!" quivered Percy. "What nonsense!" scoffed James. "There's no such thing as monsters." "I did see a monster," Percy pleaded. At least, I thought I did."
"What did it look like?" asked Murdoch.
"It was huge, dark, and shook the ground," Percy began. "It sounded like an engine, but it was unlike any engine I've ever seen before, and it had a haunting whistle." Percy was interrupted by an unfamiliar whistle in the distance. "Just like that!" Percy squeaked. James and Murdoch gasped as a mammoth engine drew into Knapford Station. It was huge, dark, and it shook the ground as he made his way to the platform. The 3 engines could only stare at the strange visitor. "He must be here for a rail tour," James whispered, hoping that the engine wouldn't hear him. "Someone should say hello," suggested Percy quietly. Murdoch gulped. "I suppose I should," he whispered, and moved forward towards the large engine. He felt very nervous. "Hello?" he spoke softly. "I'm Murdoch. Who are you?" The engine suddenly let off a large cloud of steam. Murdoch, Percy, and James jumped in surprise. "He is a monster! I knew it!" Percy shrieked. "Let's get out of here!" The 3 engines did so quickly as they could. Later that day, Murdoch was telling Edward about the monster engine. "And he didn't even say anything when I spoke to him," he finished. "After all that, I don't know what to think." Edward frowned. "Well, I think you 3 have been very rude to this engine." Murdoch was confused. "What do you mean?" he asked.
Consider this, Edward explained. This engine's come for a rail tour, and the Fat Controller wants us to make each visitor feel welcome. Well, calling someone a monster and running away from them isn't very welcoming. At the very least, you did attempt to greet him. Murdoch now felt sorry for the engine. I suppose I should try again, he said. That would be a good idea, Edward smiled. Murdoch soon made his way back to Knapford. He could see the huge engine sitting alone in a siding. He began to feel nervous again. I must make him feel welcome, he huffed to himself. So he plucked up courage and made his way to the visitor. Hello, said Murdoch, his voice quiet but friendly. I'm Murdoch. Who are you?
Well, it certainly ain't Monster.
The engine boomed. Even his voice seemed to make the ground tremble. I'm sorry about earlier, Murdoch continued. We've just, well, never seen an engine like you before.
I reckon y'all haven't.
The engine replied, sounding a little happier.
Where I'm from, folks call me Big Boy.
I imagine you pull goods trains back home.
Yep, I imagine y'all do the same. You're pretty sizable yourself, Murdoch.
That's right. And tell me, what was the longest train you've ever pulled? Soon, the two engines were chatting about goods trains like old friends. Just then, Percy arrived with some trucks. But when he saw Big Boy at the platform, he slid to a stop. It's the monster! He peeped. Wait, Percy, called Murdoch. This is no monster. His name is Big Boy, and he's an engine just like you. Percy cautiously plucked up courage. Hello? He murmured.
Howdy,
Big Boy said warmly.
Sorry if I startled you earlier. Didn't intend to, you see.
That's all right, said Percy, feeling a little better. I'm sorry I called you a monster. If only James were here, said Murdoch. Then we could get this all resolved. As if by chance, James came up. Murdoch, cried James. Have you told that monster to go away? Shush, James, Murdoch fumed. He's no monster at all. His name is Big Boy, and he's an engine just like you. Nonsense, James scoffed, and looked at Big Boy. Now listen here, monster, he commanded. Let me tell you.
If I hear you call me that again,
Big Boy boomed.
I'll grind your frames to make my bread.
Oh no! James shrieked and backed away.
Only kidding.
Big Boy chuckled. Everyone had a good laugh, while James huffed in anger. As the rail-tour train was waiting to leave the station for its journey home, James, Thomas, and Oliver watched from the sheds. The Fat Controller had shut them up for causing trouble. The three engines were bickering with each other over who was to blame. It's all your fault, Oliver, James huffed. You're the one who started all this. No, I wasn't, Oliver insisted. All I did was tell you about it. You two actually caused all the problems. Rubbish, Thomas protested. We wouldn't be shut up here if it weren't for you lot. The three engines kept bickering and bickering. Then Duck arrived. What are you three boiler-aching about? He asked crossly. The Fat Controller has shut us up here, explained Oliver, for making trouble for the visiting engine. But someone here, James slyly remarked, won't admit that it's their fault. Thomas! Shut up, James, thundered Thomas. How about your shut up, said Duck dryly. The engine subsided. Now, said Duck, it seems we can't come to an agreement on what exactly happened. I remember on the Great Western... Oh, not again, the engines groaned. As I was saying, Duck continued,
On the Great Western, a similar incident happened. So, the yard manager asked each engine to explain what happened from their own perspective and come to a resolution. "Are you suggesting we do that?" asked Oliver. "If it means that you three will finally stop fussing with each other," said Duck, "then yes." He looked at James. "Let's start with you then. What happened to cause all of you to be sent to the sheds?" James thought. "Well," he said, "it started like this. I was waiting at Knapford to pull my first train of the day. Thomas had fetched my coaches. "Here are your coaches, James," he said, "and might I add, you are looking very splendid today." "Thank you," I said. "I know." Then the new rail-to-a train arrived. The engine looked rather old and worn, but I decided to say hello anyway. "Hello," I said. "I am James. Welcome to the island of Sodor." "Hello, James," said the visitor. "You are the most splendid engine I've ever seen. I must add that your paint is very shiny. I am called Earl of Berkeley. But enough about me, please. Won't you continue to tell me about your splendidness?" So I did for several minutes before he went to get more coal and water. Later, I met with Oliver. "Hello, James," he said. "Your paint is as radiant as ever. I see you've met Earl of Berkeley." "Yes, I have," I said. "He admired my paint just as much as you did." "Although I should let you know," Oliver continued, "that he's a rather special engine too, though not as splendid as you." "What do you mean?" "You see, he's made up of a boiler of one engine and the frames of another. So kind of like a Frankenstein engine," I laughed. "Ha ha, exactly," laughed Oliver. "Not only are you splendid, James, you're also very funny." I later told my joke to Thomas. "Berkeley's made up of two different engines," I said. "He's a Frankenstein engine." "That's a funny joke, you splendid engine," Thomas laughed. Thomas's trucks laughed too. "Frankenstein, Frankenstein," they chortled. But later, the Fat Controller spoke to me. "You have upset the visiting engine," he said. "I expected better from you. You will go to your shed and think of how you will improve your attitude. And it pains me to do this because not only are you a splendid engine, you are also my favourite engine on the whole railway." "And so," finished James, "here I am." "We never called you splendid that much," groaned Oliver. "And that's not the way I remember how things went," added Thomas. "Well then, Thomas," said Duck, "how do you remember it?" "It was like this. I had been asked to arrange James's coaches for his first train when the rail-to-a train arrived. After James left, I went up to the engine to say hello. "Hello," I said. "I'm Thomas. You're Earl of Berkeley, right?" "I am," he said, "although some enthusiasts call me Duke Dog. I don't really like that name, though. It reminds me of how strange I am." "Why is that?" I asked. "My boiler came from a Duke class engine, and my frames came from a Bulldog class. That's where it comes from. The rest of my brothers were like that too. They didn't mind that, but it makes me feel, well, unusual." "I don't think you're unusual," I told Berkeley. "I promised not to call you any names." "Thank you, Thomas," he said. Later, I was arranging some trucks. They were being very troublesome today. Then James bustled in looking very amused. "Thomas," he called out, "that visiting engine is a Frankenstein engine." I couldn't help but chuckle when I heard it, but I remembered my promise. "You'd better not say that in front of him," I said. "He wouldn't like it." James ignored me and chortled away. The trucks, however, began to laugh and sing. "Frankenstein, Frankenstein," they chanted, and at just that moment Earl of Berkeley came up. "Look!" the trucks howled. "It's the Frankenstein engine!" And they cackled and laughed. Berkeley was horrified. "Thomas," he winced, "you promised." "I'm sorry, Berkeley," I tried to explain. "I wanted to keep your promise, but—" "Don't talk to me!" Buckley said sternly, and huffed away. Then the Fat Controller spoke severely to me. "I am disappointed in you, Thomas," he said. "You were told to make visitors feel welcome, not make jokes about them. You will go to your shed and think of how you will improve in future." "And since then, I've been here," said Thomas. "Well, your story sounds more believable than James's," said Oliver. "Oh, shut up," hissed James. "We still haven't heard your side of the story, Oliver," said Duck. "Right," said Oliver. "Here's how I remember it. I was waiting at the station when James came up to me. 'Oliver,' he said, 'a new rail tourist come, and I met the visiting engine. His name's Earl of Berkeley.' 'I know about that engine,' I said. 'Some people call engines like him Duke Dogs,' and I explained what that meant. 'I guess you could say he's a bit of a Frankenstein engine.' James laughed at my joke and puffed away. Later, Earl of Berkeley came up to me. I was thinking he was going around saying hello to all the engines, but he didn't look happy to see me at all. The Fat Controller and the Rail Tour Manager were in his cab, and they looked very cross. 'Oliver,' the Fat Controller said, 'Earl of Berkeley has said that some engines have been calling him names. Do you know anything about this?' 'I only told James that Berkeley was a Duke Dog,' I said, 'put together from different parts of different engines like a Frankenstein.' 'Oliver,' snapped the Rail Tour Manager, 'it's not polite to make jokes about others.' 'Are all engines on this railway as crude as him, sir?' asked Berkeley. 'I'm sorry, Berkeley,' the Fat Controller said. 'I just don't know what's gotten into these engines.' He then looked at me. 'You will go to your shed and think of how you will improve your behaviour to visitors.' And so, here I am," finished Oliver. Duck thought for a moment. "Well," he said at last, "after hearing everything you three have said, I have determined that you're all wrong." Oliver made the Frankenstein joke, which he told to James, who told to Thomas. Thomas's trucks overheard and made a scene just as Berkeley arrived. Berkeley must have told the Fat Controller and the Rail Tour Manager, who then punished Thomas. Thomas told them he heard the joke from James, so they punished him. James told them that he heard the joke from Oliver, so they punished him. And so, Duck finished, that's why you're all here. "I suppose that makes sense," said Thomas. "We should all apologise before he leaves," said Oliver. "But how?" asked James. "The Fat Controller would never let us out before he's left." "I think I can arrange that," said a familiar voice. At Knapford Station, the rail tour train was waiting to depart. Earl of Berkeley looked up and saw Thomas, Oliver and James puffing towards him. "Oh no," he groaned. "What do you want? Haven't you caused enough trouble?" "We wanted to say that we're sorry," said Thomas. "We understand now that jokes about others can sometimes be hurtful," put in James. "We promise not to call you names ever again," added Oliver. Earl of Berkeley thought for a moment. "Well," he said, "I'll forgive you, just as long as you all promise not to call me a Frankenstein engine anymore." "We promise," the three engines agreed. Earl of Berkeley smiled. "I suppose this railway isn't so bad after all." Duck the Great Western Engine was waiting at the station when Emily pulled up beside him. "Hello, Emily," he said. "Lovely day, isn't it?" "No, it's not," Emily snapped. "Whatever's the matter?" "A new rail tour is coming to the island," explained Emily. "That's not really something to get upset over," pondered Duck. "You don't understand," Emily went on. "My good-for-nothing sister's pulling the train." Duck was surprised. "Her name is Gertrude," Emily continued, "and back in the old days, she'd always fuss and lecture me every chance she could. Don't do this, Emily. Don't do that, Emily. It's unbecoming of an engine of your status, Emily. It drove me mad. I was glad to be rid of her once I came to Sodor.
Just then the signal changed and Emily puffed away. Later, Duck arrived at Knapford Station and he saw the visiting engine in a siding. As soon as he arranged his trucks, he went over to say hello. "Hello, I'm Duck. You must be Gertrude," he said warmly.
Yes, I am, the visitor replied. How do you know my name?
"Your sister Emily told me," Duck explained. "She also mentioned that you two have a bit of history together." Gertrude sighed and looked away. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend."
No, it's all right, Gertrude reassured. It's just that everything she said was true. I was a right fusspot to her back then, but I never meant to hurt her feelings. When I heard that my rail tour was headed to Sodor, I wanted to take an opportunity to apologise to her.
"I'll certainly let her know your intentions."
Thank you, Duck.
That night in the sheds, Emily was telling the other engines about how bossy Gertrude was. "It seems your sister of yours is nothing but trouble."
Agreed,
said James. "If I were you," added Henry, "I'd avoid her so she won't be able to order you about."
I suggest we all do that, huffed Emily.
"No, wait a minute," interrupted Duck. "I spoke to Gertrude earlier today. She told me she wants to apologise for being so bossy."
Emily spluttered. I don't believe her. It sounds like she just wants to make trouble for me again. Henry's right. I say we avoid her while she's here.
"That's settled then," said Gordon. Duck wished it wasn't. The next day, the engines made their plan. Whenever they saw Gertrude, they ignored any attempt she made to speak to them. "I'm sorry about those silly engines," Duck said later that day. "I did try to tell her, but she thinks you're lying."
It's a shame, said Gertrude. I hate to think I came all this way for nothing.
Just then, Emily pulled up.
Duck, she said, what are you doing talking to her?
"That's enough, Emily," Duck announced. "Gertrude here's been trying to talk to you ever since she's arrived. The very least you could do is hear her out." Emily huffed.
"All right,"
she said crossly. Gertrude began.
"Emily, I know that when you left for Sodor years ago, we weren't on the best of terms. I know that I fussed at you constantly, but it was only because I thought I knew better. I know it's taken me a long time to realise how my actions have affected you, and all I wanted to say was, I'm sorry."
Well, Emily didn't know what to think. Part of her wanted to accept Gertrude's apology, but another part reminded her of how rude she was all those years ago. So she said nothing and backed out of the yard. Gertrude was most upset.
"She'll never forgive me," she whimpered.
The next day, Emily was puffing happily down the line with the coaches. But when she turned the corner, she could see that a lorry had slid off the road and crashed onto the tracks. Emily's driver applied the brakes, but it was too late. Emily crashed straight into the lorry and came off the rails. No one was hurt, but Emily laid on the ballast, bewildered by the crash. While her driver and guard checked to see if the passengers were okay, the fireman went to telephone for help. Meanwhile, at Knapford, Gertrude's rail tour train was waiting to set off. she was still sad that she'd never made amends with Emily. Suddenly, the rail tour manager came up. "I'm sorry, Gertrude," he said, "but there's been an accident up the line. Until it's been cleared, we're stuck here." "Oh dear," thought Gertrude. Then the station master came up. "I just received updated news on the accident," he said. "Apparently, Emily has hit a lorry and has come off." Gertrude gasped. "Please, sir," she said to the rail tour manager, "do let me help her. She's my sister after all." "Very well," the rail tour manager agreed. "Be quick now." So Gertrude grabbed a huge crane from the yard and made her way to the accident. Emily was surprised to see her. "Gertrude," she said, "what are you doing here?" "I came to save you, silly." "But why, after I've been so rude?" "You're still my sister," Gertrude said. "Nothing can change that. Now, let's get you back on the rails." Once the accident had been cleared away, Emily and Gertrude made their way back to the yard. "I'm sorry that I didn't believe you," said Emily, "and I forgive you for being fussy all those years ago, and I forgive you for holding a grudge," said Gertrude. "Now that's what I like to see," said Duck. "Of course, a feud like this would never have lasted long on the Great Western." "Oh no," groaned Emily. "Really?" said Gertrude huffily. "Well, let me tell you how we did things on the Great Northern. If you do, the train will never leave," said her driver, and everyone had a good laugh. Toby the tram engine had just finished arranging trucks in the yard when a new rail tour train arrived. He looked like a diesel, but had several strange attachments and a long metal arm on its roof. He was also pulling a large yellow van along with the coaches. As the visitor uncoupled from his train and rolled into a siding, Toby rang his bell cheerfully. "Hello," he said. But the engine sniffed and looked away. This made Toby cross. "You know," he said, "it's only polite to respond when someone greets you. I don't associate with out-of-date claptraps like yourself," the engine said. Toby hissed with anger. "But if you must know, my name is Zebedee. I'm an electric engine." He raised his arm. "This is a pantograph. It helps me to collect electricity from overhead wires." Toby was secretly impressed. "But," Zebedee went on, "since this railway is still living in the time of the Romans, they gave me this generator to power my engine. Pity though, almost all the lines on the mainland have been electrified. Too bad you've all been left out." "That's not true," Toby huffed. "We have a branch line that's been electrified." "Still, that's just one line," Zebedee chortled. "But it'll be a matter of time before your controller scraps the lot of you and moves on with the times. Contribute to the zeitgeist, if you will." Toby angrily huffed away. Later, Toby met up with Edward and told him all about how rude Zebedee was. "Take no notice," said Edward. "We've seen this type before. He'll get what's coming to him eventually." But Toby wondered when eventually would be. The other engines soon got to meet Zebedee too, and their stories were no different than Toby's. He made them very cross as he sang the praises of electric traction. Who does that engine think he is? Huffed Gordon in the sheds that night. Coming here and calling us outdated.
Indeed, added James. Someone should put that Zebedee in his place.
But what can we do? Asked Henry.
I have an idea, Thomas slyly smiled, and it involves that generator of his.
No, Thomas, Edward warned. 2 wrongs never make a right.
You wouldn't want to get in trouble yourself, added Toby.
But Thomas was confident that his plan would work. The next day, while Zebedee was still asleep, Thomas slid into the yard and coupled up to the generator van. But as he tried to sneak away with it, Zebedee woke up.
What do you think you're doing, you silly little engine? He snapped. Let go of my van at once. Not until you stop being rude to us, Thomas huffed.
The 2 engines began bickering back and forth. Charlotte, called a well-known voice. Now what is all this fuss about?
That engine's stealing my van, sir, Zebedee pleaded.
Shamish, the Fat Controller spoke. I'm ashamed of you. You're causing trouble for our guest.
But, sir...
No excuses, the Fat Controller continued. You will shunt chocks in the yard until you can behave again.
Yes, sir,
Thomas mumbled.
Sorry, sir.
Zebedee grinned sheepishly.
My plan didn't work,
Thomas told Edward and Toby later that day.
We told you not to,
Toby huffed. I'm sure he'll get his comeuppance sooner or later, Edward reassured. Just then, Edward's driver arrived on the platform. Come along, Edward, he said. Zebedee's had an accident. We must fetch the works coach. Edward laughed. I suppose sooner came rather than later. Meanwhile, Zebedee was feeling miserable. He had his pantograph up and got it stuck underneath a station's pedestrian bridge. James was right behind him with a local train. But the coaches weren't at the platform, and the passengers were stuck waiting. Worse still, the level crossing was blocked, so cars, buses, and lorries were stuck on either side.
Come on, tooted Bertie impatiently. I've got passengers to deliver. Don't blame me, huffed James. Mr. Modern Engine up there's blocking the platform.
And he wouldn't have gotten stuck, the station master said, if he hadn't learned to keep his pantograph down on unelectrified lines.
It's a force of habit, Zebedee pleaded.
Stow it, you, the station master fumed. Edward soon came up with the works coach. Hello, Zebedee, said Edward cheerfully. I see you're in a spot of bother. Pity our whole railway isn't electrified, then you wouldn't have to deal with these low bridges. Zebedee said nothing. Never mind, Edward continued. We'll sort this all out. The workmen soon got the pantograph unstuck. Zebedee lowered it and sulked away without even so much as a thank you. James's passengers were soon on the platform. Bertie was on his way. The next day, Toby was making his way to Knapford. Edward was already there.
Did the Riotour train leave yet?
He asked. I'm afraid you just missed it, said Edward.
Pity, remarked Toby. I would have liked to have seen if he was sorry for making all that trouble yesterday.
He didn't say anything, said Edward, but I think he is. Probably just too proud to admit it. I hope Edward is right. Don't you? Paxton, the diesel shunter, had just arranged some coal trucks when the last Riotour train of the summer arrived. He was surprised to see that it was being pulled by a large blue diesel. I've never seen this engine around before, Paxton said to himself. Perhaps he's visiting. I'll go and say hello. Paxton made his way to the visiting engine. Hello, I'm Paxton. Is this a rail to a train? Yes, it is, said the Diesel. I'm Deltic.
The Deltic prototype!
Exclaimed Diesel as he ran into the yard.
I thought I recognised you.
Do you two know each other? Paxton asked. Well, no, Deltic said. I don't believe we've met.
Pardon me, said Diesel. I'm just a big fan.
He looked at Paxton.
This engine's famous. He's the prototype diesel locomotive for the Class 55 Express engines.
That's right, Deltic said, impressed by Diesel's knowledge. That's amazing, said Paxton. I never knew that. Diesel frowned.
What do you mean? He sniffed. Every diesel knows about the Deltic prototype.
I appreciate your enthusiasm, said Deltic. Maybe there are others who'd like to meet me.
Oh, yes, said Diesel. Come along, Paxton. Let's tell the others.
So Diesel and Paxton told all the other Diesels they saw about Deltic coming to visit. Later that day, all the Diesels gathered together at Knapford to meet the visiting engine. Was that large thing on your ends meant to be a light? Said Harry. It was, explained Deltic. My builders had hoped for this feature to win over American investors, but it never came to pass. I kind of like it, to be honest. Makes me look a bit grand. I agree, said Bert. Then Thomas came over to see what the fuss was about. Hello, he said. What's going on here?
Go away, Thomas, Diesel snapped. This doesn't concern stinky steamies like yourself.
Harry and Bert laughed. Diesel, Deltic said, aghast. That wasn't nice. What was that for?
I'm surprised, Deltic, said Diesel. I never expected you, of all Diesels, to be nice towards a steamy.
He looked at Thomas.
But I suppose he could stay and come to terms with the fact that Diesels will ultimately replace steam engines on this island.
Deltic was furious. I'm ashamed of you, he fumed. To think that I'd condone that type of attitude towards a steam engine. Diesel gasped. This kind of thinking, Deltic went on, is not only unacceptable, but also woefully ignorant. He paused impressively. One day, you too will be replaced once your working life has been exceeded. The Diesels didn't say anything. Even Thomas felt unnerved by Deltic's words. Although, Deltic said finally, I would be remiss if I didn't admit that I was once overconfident and arrogant. But then, I learned a lesson that I'd never forget. Could you tell us, please? Asked Mavis. Of course, said Deltic. I was built to be a powerful passenger engine and spent sometimes pulling passengers between London and the Northwest. They liked me so much that they made more Diesels like me to pull trains along the East Coast. My brothers and I replaced many steam engines who serviced that line, and I'm sorry to say that we were boastful and took no pity on their situation. At the time, I thought there was no other engine as grand as I believed that Diesels would pave the way for the future of transport.
I'm just the fastest thing you'll ever see. That streak of lightning you just missed was me. Don't stop now, you gotta keep it going all night. Rolling stock, we're rolling stock. You got no lovers if you got no wheels. Come on and heat me up the way you do. Bet I can keep it going longer than you. Don't stop now, you gotta keep it going. going all night. Don't try to show you can go faster than me. This is my back view and it's all you'll see. Don't stop now, you gotta keep it going all night. Rolling stock, we're rolling stock. Rolling stock, we're rolling stock. Rolling stock, we're rolling stock.
Then, one day, while waiting at a station, I saw it. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. A passenger train with what looked like 2 engines, one at each end. My driver said they were doing trials on a new type of passenger train. Sometime later, we received word that head office would be replacing us with what they called high-speed trains. I didn't believe them. We were the engines of the future, I said. They'll never replace us. But my brothers and I soon found ourselves, one by one, being removed from our regular express passenger duties. I was stopped at a station with a local passenger train when one of these new engines spoke to me. "Hey Pip," said the front engine, "look at this miserable lot." "Isn't that a Deltic, Emma?" the other one said. "They run express trains, right?" "That's right, but we've taken over now. It's only a matter of time before they're withdrawn and scrapped." Their guard's whistle blew. "Bye-bye, Grandad. Enjoy your time while you still got it." I wanted to say something, but I knew they were right. Eventually, the day did come. 6 of us, including myself, were selected for preservation. The rest, well, you can imagine what happened to them. Everyone was silent. "And this cycle will always continue," Delta concluded. "Even today, the railway is on talks with replacing the high-speed trains with faster, more advanced engines. And they'll feel the same way as I did." He looked at Diesel. "Now, Diesel, do you understand why this mindset is harmful?" Diesel looked at his buffers. "Yes," he said quietly. "Good," Deltic stated. "Now, if you all don't mind, it's getting rather late, and I'd like to get some rest." The engines soon left the yard. Diesel was last to leave. As he crawled home slowly, he thought about Deltic's story. I think that Diesel learned a great deal today. Wouldn't you agree?
It's Thomas the Tank Engine, hip 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 hooray. Chugga chugga chug chug chuff chuff chuff, he rides along the way. And when you hear that whistle, it can only be one train. Our favorite little engine, Thomas is his name. Thomas the Tank Engine rolling along. All of his friends will be coming along. Thomas, we love you. He's a really useful engine with a heart that's big and strong. He chugga chugga chuff chuffs, working hard, helping everyone. Thomas Thomas, he has lots of friends, and you can be one too. Just clap, clap, clap and sing along. Thomas, we love you. Thomas the Tank Engine rolling along. All of his friends will be coming along. Thomas, we love you. There's Gordon and Henry, Edward, James and Toby, Annie and Clarabelle. Don't forget Percy, Terence and Bertie, Diesel, Duck and Daisy. Lots more friends for you. He's always up to mischief, that cheeky little train. He chugga-chugga-chuff-chuffs everywhere. He's always playing games. The fat controller scolds him, but he loves him just the same. Our favorite little engine, Thomas is his name. Thomas the Tank Engine rolling along. And all of his friends will be coming along. Thomas, we love you. Thomas the Tank Engine's rolling along. All of his friends will be coming along. Thomas, we love you. Thomas, we love you. Thomas, we
This is Stanley. Oh, yes, Mr. Curator, hello. Ah, yes, thank you. I can assure you that we at Branco are delighted to wrap up another successful summer of rail tours. Yes, indeed. We have already begun the planning stages for next summer. I can say with confidence that... Oh, your locomotives we loaned. Ah, from last summer, yes. Mallard, City of Truro, Flying Scotsman, to name a few. When will they be returned to the museum? Well, that's rather hard to say. Yes. Yes, I understand your concern, but need I remind you, in our locomotive facility, we will correct any faults or damages should anything happen to these engines, as per our contract. Of course, I care for these machines as much as you do. It's in my blood. Yes, once they've properly been tested and approved, they'll be returned to you as if they've never left. Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon. Mr. Davies entered the office. Problems, sir? He asked. No, not at all, said Sir Brian Stanley. But do me a favour, won't you? Round up a public relations team and send them to the National Railway Museum in York. Give them some schematics and diagnostic test results for their engines. Anything to, say, keep the curators happy. Understood, sir, said Mr. Davies, and left the office. Sir Brian Stanley sighed. That's the second time this month they've asked me about returning their engines, he said to himself. Hopefully that PR team can quell them for another year or so, at the least. I must not let anyone know of my plans.